What is going on literally behind closed doors are crimes against humanity.
A 22-year-old American imprisoned in North Korea for 17 months died from lack of oxygen and blood to the brain.
A tree. The last time I went to court in 1998, 8 years ago, I saw a tree.
These are the deadliest prisons where those who commit the unspeakable crime of killing children face a fate worse than death. One horrifying example in this episode is Camp 22, where prisoners suffer deliberate starvation and forced labor, regardless of their missing limbs.
Bracing for a possible violent backlash, a top-secret report about to be revealed. Inside, how the CIA tortured prisoners.
Similarly, Barlinnie Prison has special suicide prevention cells, as the brutal conditions have driven some inmates to take their own lives. Can any punishments truly fit the crime of taking a child's life? Join us as we take you inside the most inhuman prisons for kid killers. Diyarbakir Prison. Between 1981 and 1984, 34 prisoners lost their lives in Diyarbakir Prison, but the real toll was far beyond the death count. Diyarbakir Prison, located in southeastern Turkey, has a dark and violent history. Originally built in 1980 as an E-type prison by the Ministry of Justice, it became a military-run facility after the 1980 Turkish coup. It wasn't until 1988 that control was handed back to the Ministry of Justice. Though its official capacity is 744, the prison often sees overcrowding. When the Human Rights Commission visited in 1996, the prison, which had space for 650, was holding a staggering 942 prisoners. There's also Diyarbakir D-type prison, designed specifically for political prisoners, which can house up to 688 people. Now, the real horrors of Diyarbakir Prison began in the early 1980s, particularly between 1981 and 1984, when it earned the nickname the Hell of Diyarbakir. During this period, prisoners endured brutal and systematic torture. The prison became infamous for being the most notorious jails in the world. Tragically, 34 prisoners died during this time. In 2009, there were talks of turning the prison into a school, but Kurdish activists pushed for it to become a museum of shame, a memorial to human rights abuses. Despite these efforts, the plans were largely ignored, and Diyarbakir Prison is still operational today. Inside, guards used euphemisms like disco, theater, and bathroom to describe the cruel and inhumane torture methods they employed. These included beatings, sensory deprivation, mock executions, electric shocks, assault, and much more. Even though the prison's history is a horrific reminder of abuse, it remains a dark chapter in Turkey's past, still very much alive and contentious today. While Diyarbakir Prison's dark history still haunts us, it's not the only place where terrible abuses have happened. Let's now look at another famous prison, one that shows just how far human suffering can go. Sante Prison. Imagine a prison so grim and oppressive that many prisoners saw no way out but to take their own lives. Sante Prison, located in the southern part of Paris, is one of the most notorious jails in France.
So welcome to Sante Prison in Paris.
It has both VIP and high-security sections, spread across 2 levels, an upper and a lower. Until the year 2000, prisoners were separated by race, with different sections for people from Western Europe, Black Africa, North Africa, and other places. Built in 1867, Sante started with 500 cells, but it grew over time to hold up to 1,000 cells for about 2,000 prisoners. It was also the location of public executions, with the guillotine positioned right outside its gates until 1939, further cementing its grim reputation. Life in the prison was so brutal that many prisoners chose to take their own lives rather than serve their sentences. In fact, in 1999, 124 inmates died by suicide. For years, the awful conditions at La Sante went unnoticed until Veronica Vasseur, a doctor who worked there, exposed the truth. She revealed that up to 4 prisoners were crammed into tiny cells for most of the day, forced to sleep on filthy, bug-infested mattresses, and had to stuff clothing in cracks to keep rats out. The hygiene was terrible too, with only 2 showers a week, even in the heat. The prison had a strict hierarchy, with powerful inmates making life even harder for the weaker ones. Many prisoners lost their mental stability because of how inhumane things were. Overcrowding was a huge problem. Even in 2013, prisoners had barely 2 square meters of space each. In the high-security cells, it was so cramped that inmates could almost touch both walls at the same time. This overcrowding led to more suicides and sparked a lot of escape attempts. After the dark reality of La Sante, we moved to another notorious prison, built to hold the world's most dangerous criminals with strict isolation and high security. ADX Florence. If you were to ask anyone in the world's toughest prisons about where the real hell on earth is, many would point to one place: ADX Florence. ADX Florence, a supermax prison established in 1994, houses some of the most dangerous criminals in the United States. ADX Florence is often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies due to its reputation and location. With its combination of intense security, strict routines, and isolation, it's no wonder this place is one of the most notorious prisons in the United States. Located in Florence, Colorado, this prison is part of the Federal Correctional Complex, Florence, and it sits on about 49 acres of land. ADX Florence is designed to hold inmates who are too violent, high-profile, or risky for even the most secure prisons out there. When it was first created, the goal was to build a facility specifically for inmates who posed a serious threat to staff or fellow prisoners. Since then, ADX Florence has become famous for housing dangerous criminals like terrorists, serial killers, and notorious gang members. It's not just another maximum security prison, it's on a whole different level. The inmates are confined to their cells for most of the day, where they live in solitary confinement, isolated from other prisoners. They only get about 1 hour a day outside for exercise, and even then, they're restrained and watched closely. The prison's layout is designed to keep the inmates completely under control. Each cell is made of reinforced concrete, with no sharp edges or items that could be used for self-harm. These cells are equipped with a bed, a desk, and a sink. But the showers are on timers to prevent flooding, and everything is built to minimize interaction with guards. There's a small window that lets the inmates see the sky, but not enough to figure out where they are in the prison. Their exercise yard is more like a concrete pit, so there's no chance they can plan an escape from there either. There's a strict routine, and the guards make rounds every 15 minutes to check on the inmates. If a prisoner breaks the rules, there are consequences. ADX Florence isn't meant to be a long-term home for these inmates. The goal is to keep inmates at the facility for no more than 3 years, with the possibility of being transferred to less restrictive facilities if they show good behavior. To maintain control, the entire prison is equipped with motion detectors, cameras, and 1,400 steel doors, all of which can be controlled remotely. Officers in the control center are watching the inmates around the clock, and if they suspect an escape attempt, they can hit a panic button that slams every door shut across the facility. The perimeter is surrounded by pressure pads and 12-foot razor wire fences, with heavily armed officers keeping a close watch. It's a tough place, designed to deal with the most dangerous criminals in the federal system. Even though the prisoners are kept isolated, there are still some privileges. Inmates can earn things like books, newspapers, and even a TV in their cell, which only shows educational, religious, and entertainment content. Still, life here is far from easy. It's about control and keeping these high-risk offenders from causing harm to anyone, including themselves. Moving on from the strict isolation of ADX Florence, we now visit a prison where inmates not only live with their families, but also control their own surroundings. San Pedro Prison. Right in the middle of La Paz, Bolivia, there's a prison that's basically a small town where prisoners can buy and sell their own cells.
This is the most incredible, bizarre place in the world. I mean, there were women and children, none of the inmates had uniforms, they all had the key of their own cells, they had to buy their own prison cells.
This is San Pedro, the weirdest prison you will ever hear about. Built in 1895, this prison takes up an entire city block and opens up to a beautiful plaza. On the outside, it looks pretty normal. You will see indigenous women in colorful clothes standing by carts, making fresh orange juice, and old men feeding pigeons on benches. Police officers in green uniforms lean against the 15-meter-high yellow wall at the entrance, looking pretty relaxed. But once you walk through the heavy iron gates, everything changes. Inside, it's less like a prison and more like a Bolivian street scene. You will find men chatting casually, women carrying bags of food or roasting meat on gas stoves, and kids laughing while playing. There are stray cats and dogs lounging under tables, and the walls are plastered with Coca-Cola logos. Strangely, no one's in a prison uniform, and there are no guards in sight, making us wonder if this is a prison. Now, when you think of a prison, you imagine it being controlled by guards, right? Well, this one is totally the opposite. Originally meant to house about 500 inmates, it now holds nearly 3,000. The inmates run the place, with only a small amount of influence from the police. Here, prisoners are in charge of their own lives. They have to buy or rent their cells from other inmates using money earned while working in the prison. Some even pay to have their families live with them.
Entire families are living here. If the husband gets sentenced, he comes to prison, the family's on the outside without an income, so the family comes in.
San Pedro is divided into different sections, ranging from cheap, dangerous areas to higher-end parts with gated communities, private bathrooms, and cable TV. Inmate leaders and section committees govern the prison, and they often use force, extortion, and even torture to maintain control. As you wander through the hallways, you'll stumble upon churches, market stalls, and even restaurants. Climbing up the old stairs, you'll find small businesses, craft workshops, classrooms, a gym, and a billiard hall. They even have a football field and a childcare center.
One of the things that amazes me the most is the amount of children here. They're everywhere.
It's less of a prison and more of a mini-city within a city. Compared to other prisons, San Pedro feels like a hotel. With its central location, it's easy for families to visit. Since it's a minimum security facility, the atmosphere is much more relaxed. Because of this, spots in San Pedro are in high demand. New prisoners have to buy their own cells, negotiating a price with the outgoing inmate. Once the deal is made, they sign a contract and a property deed is created for the cell. The cells are anything but ordinary. Their prices depend on the size, quality, and location. with the 8 sections ranked like hotel rooms. In the 5-star section, wealthy inmates live in luxurious rooms with carpeted floors, furniture, ensuite bathrooms, and even city views. Some of these cells go for as much as $30,000. Meanwhile, in the 1-star sections, up to 5 men are packed into tiny spaces known as coffins, which cost only a few $100s. For the wealthy, they can either renovate their cells or even construct entirely new ones. Take Bolivia's most famous drug trafficker, Red Beard, for example. After being caught with over 4 tons of cocaine, he wasn't happy with his small cell, so he added a 2nd floor and installed cable TV. A politician in the upscale section even had a huge library and even a jacuzzi in his room. And if you think cells can't have cells inside them, think again. This next prison will totally blow your mind. Black Dolphin Prison. Imagine being locked away in a place where hope fades. That's Black Dolphin Prison, a maximum security prison in Russia that has housed the country's most notorious criminals since the year 1745. Originally, it was built as a jail for people sentenced to life at hard labor. But after a rebellion was suppressed in 1773, the prison was updated to deport and confine robbers. Fast forward to today, and Black Dolphin is home to around 700 prisoners, including some seriously bad individuals. Think child molesters, murderers, terrorists, cannibals, and serial killers. These individuals are serving life sentences, and the prison started accepting them in the year 2000. So, what's life like inside Black Dolphin? Inmates are kept in isolation, locked in cells with 3 steel doors, and are only allowed 90 minutes of exercise each day in a large cage. During that time, their cells are searched for contraband, and they are constantly under 24-hour surveillance. The rules are super strict too. Prisoners have to stand for 16 hours a day, and they're not allowed to rest or sit on their bunks. When guards give commands, prisoners have to respond with immediate effect. And just to make sure everyone's following the rules, guards check in every 15 minutes. Meals at Black Dolphin are basic as well, with prisoners receiving soup 4 times a day. However, they do have some privileges, such as access to payphones, newspapers, and a radio. Now, when new prisoners arrive, they're blindfolded to prevent them from mapping out the prison or planning escapes. They're also blindfolded whenever they're transported between buildings. To ensure prisoners don't get any ideas, guards use a unique control tactic by keeping them bent over at the waist, with their handcuffed hands held behind their back. From the cold, strict isolation of Black Dolphin, we now journey to a camp where families lived in captivity, enduring grueling labor, starvation, and untold suffering. Camp 22. Life in Camp 22 meant a daily struggle against starvation, brutality, and hopelessness, with no one ever leaving the way they came in. Camp 22 covered an area of about 225 square kilometers and was surrounded by an inner electric fence, running at a deadly 3,300 volts, and an outer fence lined with barbed wire, traps, and hidden nails. Controlled by around 1,000 guards and 500 to 600 administrative staff, the camp was a place of extreme danger. Guards were armed with automatic rifles, machine guns, hand grenades, clubs, whips, and even trained dogs. By the 1990s, it housed an estimated 50,000 prisoners, mostly those who spoke out against the government, political dissidents, or people deemed unreliable, such as prisoners of war, Christians, and former party members. The horrifying system of guilt by association meant entire families, including children and the elderly, were imprisoned together, and the cycle often continued with future generations born in the camp. Prisoners were never released and remained locked up until their death. Former guard An Myong Chol, who witnessed the horrors firsthand, recalls the shock of seeing emaciated prisoners, many deformed from beatings and mistreatment. About 30% of the prisoners had severe deformities, and many were missing limbs but still forced to work. The food rations were cruelly meager, just 180 grams of corn per meal twice a day, with no vegetables or meat, unless they managed to catch rats, snakes, frogs, or insects. The death toll was staggering, with approximately 1,500 to 2,000 people dying from malnutrition each year, most of them children. Despite this, the camp's population remained steady, indicating a constant flow of new prisoners. Children, starting at age 6, were put to work in the fields and given only minimal food. Sadly, many didn't live past 10. Elderly prisoners were given no special treatment and worked just as hard as the younger ones. Those who became seriously ill were abandoned and left to die. Living conditions were harsh, with prisoners crammed into bunkhouses with up to 100 people per room. Families who worked well might be allowed to live together in a small, crumbling house, but these houses had no running water and were in poor condition. Work in the camp was grueling. Prisoners toiled from 5 in the morning to 8 in the evening in agriculture, mining, and factories, followed by hours of ideological sessions and forced self-criticism. New Year's Day was the only day off, and even that came with a catch. The mines lacked any safety measures, so accidents were common and prisoners often died on the job. Those who fell victim to tunnel collapses or fires were simply left behind. When prisoners died, their bodies were often discarded with coal to be burned in furnaces, and the ashes were sent to power plants and steel mills. The suffering at Camp 22 is hard to imagine, but the harsh conditions don't stop there. On the other side of the world in Africa, another prison shows how overcrowding and lack of basic needs make survival a constant fight. Gitarama Prison. Now let's take a look at Gitarama Prison, located in Muhanga Town in Rwanda's southern province, Africa. This facility is notorious for its harsh conditions. Originally designed to hold about 500 inmates, it now houses around 6,000, leading to extreme overcrowding. The prisoners are packed so tightly that they often have to stand for hours, unable to sit or lie down, which causes severe physical strain. The lack of sanitation forces inmates to stand in their own waste, leading to widespread infections. Medical care is grossly inadequate, with makeshift amputations performed without proper equipment or anesthesia. Food is scarce and of poor quality, leading to malnutrition and weakened immune systems. The psychological toll is immense, with constant struggles for survival creating an atmosphere of despair. The harsh conditions continue beyond Rwanda. Now let's move to Nigeria, where another overcrowded prison awaits. Kirikiri Maximum Prison. In this prison, even the most basic comforts, such as food and shelter, seem like distant dreams. Located just west of Apapa in Lagos State, Nigeria, Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison takes its name from the nearby Kirikiri community. It is part of the Nigerian Correctional Service and was first set up in 1955. The prison has an official capacity of 1,056, but it is known for being overcrowded. In fact, by February 1990, it was holding about 1,645 inmates, well above its official capacity, and it had already gained a reputation for this issue. By March 20, 2018, the United Kingdom even decided to invest around $939,000 to add a 112-bed wing to the facility to help transfer Nigerian prisoners from the United Kingdom. Kirikiri also holds some death row inmates. As of October 20, 2021, the daily food allowance per prisoner was increased from 450 naira to 1,000 naira, after complaints that the previous allowance was too low. But prisoners themselves say the meals are still poor. One anonymous inmate shared that breakfast often consists of poorly cooked beans every single morning, while another described the food as so bad that even a hungry dog would reject it. Many prisoners try to cook their own food in their cells, with some even managing to get kerosene stoves for this purpose. Interestingly, there is a VIP section where certain inmates live in much better conditions, complete with their own cook, personal laundry help, and even a generator for electricity. Meanwhile, official statements from the Lagos State Prisons Command deny the claims that food conditions haven't improved, but a senior prison officer contradicted this, saying nothing had changed in terms of food quality. For many, the only way to survive is by providing their own meals. Just when you thought things couldn't be darker, step inside a Venezuelan prison where violence and power struggles rule, and the guards are just bystanders. Maracaibo National Prison. What would you do if you found yourself in a prison where gangs were in charge and the guards had no power to stop them? That's exactly the reality in Maracaibo Prison in Maracaibo, Venezuela. Opened in 1958, it quickly became notorious for its harsh conditions and complete chaos. In this prison, security is not handled by the usual prison staff, but by Venezuela's National Guard, a military force we've never seen deployed in such a setting before. This is far from your typical prison. It resembles more of a town, with prisoners observing us as we make our way through the corridors, all while being surrounded by armed police. This place is like a run-down village with crumbling cafes and fast food spots, and the prisoners practically run it. Inmates spend their days living in dark, dilapidated conditions, with no-go areas controlled by the prisoners themselves. The deal between the guards and prisoners is simple. As long as the prisoners stay calm, they leave each other alone. But if things go wrong, the prison goes into chaos. Water, food, electricity, and even family visits can be cut off. And if the prisoners get angry enough, they fight back by setting the whole place on fire. In the middle of it all, we met the man in bright yellow sneakers, the prison boss. He runs everything in here, taking $1 a week from each of the 5,500 prisoners, raking in $5,500 every week. Inside the prison, there's no shortage of weapons, alcohol, drugs, and even women. It's a place completely out of control. With Venezuela's prison system and legal infrastructure falling apart, this is a shot of a government unable to manage its prisons or its people. The whole system is in ruins, and yet the government insists its prisons are education centers, where inmates are forced to recite revolutionary slogans in support of former President Hugo Chavez. But inside these prisons, the prisoners face brutality, hunger, and a broken system that can't seem to function properly. The prison was essentially ruled by gangs, each creating their own dangerous hierarchy. Many inmates were forced to pay for basic protection and necessities, and violence was an everyday reality. Riots were frequent, leading to high death tolls, and with guards overwhelmed and underpaid, they had little control over the situation. It often felt more like a lawless city than a prison. Maracaibo was finally closed down in 2013 after a violent riot claimed the lives of 16 inmates. Today, there are plans to reopen the facility as a museum, giving visitors a chance to see the sites of infamous massacres and learn about the dark history of corrupt prison systems. Subscribers pick. As shown in this image, 4 child killers are on the verge of a moment from which there is no escape, about to face execution. The tension is thick in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone. Their faces, once filled with hope and dreams, now show nothing but fear and regret. None of them could have imagined their lives would end like this. Yet here they are, waiting for something they can't change. What do you think they're thinking right now? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Gldani Prison. Located in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, Gldani Prison was already known for its severe treatment of inmates, but nothing could have prepared the world for the graphic abuse footage that surfaced in 2012. The videos showed prison guards and their superiors inflicting brutal abuse on detainees at Gldani No. 8 Prison, revealing a culture of cruelty that went all the way to the top. The revelations sparked widespread protests and demands for justice. What made this scandal even more explosive was the way it spread. The footage, which initially went viral on social media, wasn't picked up by Gldani's pro-government TV stations until much later. The graphic nature of the abuse sparked massive protests in cities like Tbilisi, Batumi, and Poti, with people demanding justice. The outrage was so intense that it led to the firing of David Chakwa, the chairman of the penitentiary department, and eventually the resignation of Katuna Kalmakelidze. This scandal was a reflection of the increasing mistreatment of prisoners during the years following the Rose Revolution, when the pro-Western United National Movement came to power in 2004. As the number of prisoners skyrocketed from 6,000 to over 24,000, the conditions in Gldani's prisons only worsened. The abuse escalated in police stations and prisons alike, with reports of beatings, electric shocks, and even suffocating detainees with plastic bags. By 2007, the prison system had become notorious for its harsh treatment, and the overcrowded jails, like Gldani and Kasani, became infamous for their inhumane practices. For many, this welcoming beating was a frightening introduction to a life filled with fear and pain. While the Gldani footage shocked the world, there's another prison in Equatorial Guinea where prisoners face non-stop cruelty just to survive. Black Beach Prison. What if we told you that some prisoners in the world are not only locked away and neglected to the point of death? Black Beach Prison shows just how bad this reality is. Officially called Pla Negra, Black Beach Prison sits on Bioko Island in Equatorial Guinea, just off the coast from the capital, Malabo. Known for its brutal conditions and the mistreatment of its prisoners, this prison has earned a notorious reputation. Built during the Spanish colonial era, Black Beach has long been a symbol of political repression and human rights abuses. Over the years, it's been used by various regimes as a tool to silence opposition, with political prisoners often facing inhumane treatment and even extrajudicial killings. The prison's conditions are nothing short of appalling. Cells are overcrowded, and many inmates are forced to sleep on the floor because there aren't enough beds. Basic needs like clean water, food, and sanitation are scarce, and the place is known for its stifling heat and poor ventilation, making it almost unbearable. After learning about Black Beach, prepare yourself for another nightmare where overcrowding and abuse make it almost impossible to survive. Mendoza Prison. In the heart of Mendoza Province, a century-old prison has become a living nightmare where overcrowding, abuse, and neglect are part of daily life. Tucked away in Mendoza Province, Argentina, lies a prison built in 1886 that has witnessed horrors beyond imagination. The Mendoza Prison, originally designed to hold only 600 inmates, now houses about 1,600, causing severe overcrowding and a desperate lack of basic resources. Small cells, measuring just 43 square feet, often cram up to 5 prisoners, many of whom are forced to sleep on the cold floor with no mattresses. The conditions have been bad for years, with reports dating back to 2005 describing prisoners so desperate that they have sewn their mouths shut to protest the treatment. Torture, abuse, and even death have been regular occurrences. Prisoners have to use plastic bags or bottles as makeshift toilets because the facility lacks a functioning sewage system, and medical care is practically non-existent. Tragically, the guards are not offering any assistance. They are known for their violent behavior, not only toward the inmates, but also toward their families. However, Mendoza is just one example of how overcrowding can turn a prison into a nightmare. But there's another place where the conditions are even worse. Barlinnie Prison. Barlinnie Prison, designed by Major General Thomas Bernard Collinson, the architect and engineer for the Scottish Prison Department, opened in 1882. Located in what was once a rural area of Ridley, near the Monkland Canal, Barlinnie quickly became one of Scotland's most infamous prisons. The prison was built in stages, with 5 main halls constructed between 1882 and 1897, each designed to hold about 69 inmates. Over the years, Barlinnie expanded, especially in 1967, when an industrial compound was added around the perimeter. Known locally as the Big House, Bar, or Bar L, it became Scotland's largest prison, holding nearly 1,400 prisoners, though it was originally designed to accommodate only about 987. Despite its size, Barlinnie receives prisoners from the courts across the west of Scotland, as well as those serving shorter sentences or awaiting transfer to lower security facilities. Even with all the changes, Barlinnie still operates with its 5 main accommodation halls, which now house around 200 inmates each. There's also a hospital unit for 18 prisoners, including special cells designed for suicide prevention. Although major refurbishments have been underway since the early 2000s, Barlinnie's grim history includes practices like slopping out, which continued until 2003. Now, let's head over to a prison on an island known for its terrible living conditions. Rikers Island. Since its establishment, Rikers Island has been at the heart of New York City's criminal justice system, but its dark history tells a story of violence, neglect, and reform. Rikers Island is a massive, infamous 413-acre prison island located in the East River, just off the Bronx. It is home to New York City's largest jail. The island got its name from Abraham Riken, who claimed it back in 1664. Originally, it was under 100 acres, but over time, it expanded, mainly through convict labor, with inmates hauling in landfill made of ashes. Today, it spans more than 400 acres, and while it is technically part of the Bronx, the only way to get there is by a bridge from Queens. This island houses one of the world's largest correctional and mental health facilities, and it is definitely not a place anyone wants to end up. Operated by the New York City Department of Correction, Rikers had a budget of around $860 million a year in 2015. The staff, about 9,000 civilian officers and 1,500 other workers, managed the enormous task of handling over 100,000 admissions each year, with an average of 10,000 inmates at any given time. Most of the people there about 85% of them are still awaiting trial, either in custody or unable to post bail. The rest are serving short sentences. But Rikers Island has earned a pretty terrible reputation. It is known for violence, abuse, and neglect of its inmates, with numerous reports of assaults, both between inmates and against officers. In fact, Rikers Island was named one of the 10 worst correctional facilities in the United States in 2013 by a human rights activist, Mother Jones. The violence only got worse as the years went on. In 2015, there were over 9,000 assaults, the highest number in 5 years. Things started to shift in 2019 when the New York City Council made a major decision to close the facility by 2026. Despite all its issues, Rikers Island still holds 10 out of the 15 facilities in the New York City Department of Correction. It is home to people who are either awaiting trial, serving sentences under 1 year, or just temporarily there while waiting for a transfer to another facility. Rikers Island isn't technically considered a prison by United States standards, since most prisons hold inmates serving longer sentences. Still, Rikers holds up to 15,000 detainees, making it one of the largest jails around. Following Rikers Island's violent past, let's discover the final prison on our list, where even the toughest inmates were shattered and unspeakable horrors took place behind closed doors. Tadmor Military Prison. Locked away in the depths of Tadmor, prisoners didn't just fear losing their freedom, they feared for their lives in a place where torture was routine and death was always a possibility. Tadmor Military Prison wasn't merely a prison, it was a living nightmare. It's hard to imagine, but under President Bashar al-Assad's brutal regime, prisons like Tadmor became more than just holding cells. They were torture chambers for anyone who dared speak out. You didn't just lose your freedom there, you lost your dignity, your sanity, and in many cases, your life. Built back in 1966, for military personnel, it wasn't long before it became something far darker. By the time Assad's grip tightened, Tadmor had turned into a hub of terror, where political dissidents, defectors, and anyone deemed a threat were systematically broken. Amnesty International even called it a place built to cause the most suffering possible. One former guard, who found himself trapped in this nightmare, shared his story. He remembered a part of the prison that was sealed off and buried 7 floors underground. When the regime's crackdown on protesters got worse, they reopened this forgotten section to hold more prisoners. One of them was accused of defecting from the army, an act the regime considered a form of high treason. The guards were only allowed to visit the underground section at specific times, and when they did, they heard strange, loud, eerie noises echoing from the lower floors. When they went down with the regime's militia, they found something that still haunts them, a massive fire in the shape of a human figure lighting up the dark. It freaked everyone out, and they ran for their lives. When they told the prison director, he didn't believe them. Instead, they were punished and forced to stay in a cell next to the prisoner they'd been guarding. The next day, they found the prisoner dead, and an investigation was launched. But in Assad's Syria, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was keeping the regime's grip on power, no matter the cost. And things only got worse from there. As the revolution gained steam, the prison became a place for even more horrors. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.